I landed, and it's the 5-star treatment before you end up at the practice facility. I sign a contract for $6 million. I was on $60,000 a year. First possession, they roll the ball into you, and I went to my best move, and my shot got blocked into the side wall. Now, the guy who blocked me was Sean Bradley, who's 7'6" tall, and I'm right on 7 foot. And in that moment, I thought, shit, if this is me, I'm done.
You found that you held a standard from your basketball days. And again, you're dealing with the 1%ers in the NBA. How did you manage that when you step into the land of the mortals?
I was very, very careful with the people I surrounded myself with. I'm a big fan of being the dumbest person in a room. And if I'm going into something, I want people who I trust who are experts in something that I'm not. If I'm the smartest guy in the commerce world, we're not going to be very successful.
Chris, welcome to the UltraGrowth podcast, man. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, look, we had you at the corporate event a few weeks ago, and you're a massive hit. Love the way that you took the piss out of our MC, and it was a good time, man. Really enjoyed having you, and thought we got to unpack some of your story, particularly your focus on habits, because that is a key part of this show. And you touched on it during that corporate gig. You know, you referred back to habits. Like, have you always been habit orientated?
Yeah, they have, but that doesn't mean they were always good. And, you know, I think any kid growing up and trying to figure out who they are, or, you know, I suppose what they stand for at some level, tries to bullshit their way through sometimes, and try to take shortcuts. And, yeah, sometimes it takes that experience of getting caught out, I think, to figure it out. But, you know, when you get a little bit old, when you look back and you understand that the opportunities you're looking for often come as a result of the habit when you weren't expecting the opportunity. And look, one thing I said in the room is that my habit's always to try to be the best version of me. I'm 7 foot tall. I stand out when I walk into a room. It's like putting a uniform on, you stand out. And, you know, I learned years ago that you actually get a choice in how you'd like to stand out, positively or negatively. And that right there became, if nothing else, my habit, that you were going to get the best version of me, whatever that was. It doesn't make me better than anyone else or the best at anything. It just means what you see is what you get, and it's the best version of me possible at that time.
That's interesting, because I'm assuming you were always fairly tall. Like, did your height create pressure in terms of, like, there was always eyes on you? Like, was that something that you always recognized?
Yeah, but I never liked it. And I think any kid likes to blend in. They don't really like to stand out. So not necessarily in a good way, but you're always noticed. You know, as an adult, if I need to be seen in a room, I just do a lap and I leave if I don't want to be there, because everybody remembers seeing you. But no, I didn't feel the pressure for being tall. It was just something that, more than anything growing up, didn't really enjoy it. Didn't really enjoy standing out, but the older I got, the more and more I enjoyed doing just that.
Rewinding the tape back, like, you know, a lot of people would think because you were tall, like you had naturally just moved into basketball, but that wasn't the case, right? Like, if you can take the audience back in time to how did Chris actually meet basketball?
It was my younger brother, and he played a men's C grade competition and invited me to come and fill in for his team on a Wednesday night, middle of winter. And I told him no a bunch of times. Mum made me. And I think I said on the day that I had, that feeling in my guts that I was almost sick, anxious, nervous, whatever it was. But my absolute intent was to go up, half-arse it, because I didn't really like my brother that much, and get out of there 45 minutes later. But the simplest thought I could have possibly had changed my life. It was, I'm here now, I might as well try. And that's quite simple. Quite simply is what it was. And all trying meant for me was sprinting. And I'd played tennis at a pretty high level, so I could move. And when you're 7 foot tall and you can move okay, I guess you do stand out. And it created an opportunity with one of the parents of a kid playing 2 courts down, who was a junior basketball coach for the Melbourne Tigers development program. And he ended up inviting me to come down, and as they say, I guess the rest is history.
Did you like basketball, Chris, when you first played?
I like the fact that I fitted in so far as my height was normalised a little bit more and perceived to be a benefit, not a hindrance. But no, it was foreign to me. It was uncomfortable. I had no idea of the rules, and I always think I was fortunate to perhaps not be so in love with it. If somebody took it away from me, it wouldn't have mattered. I would have found, in my mind, I would have found another sport or something else to do. I was never so single-minded that if you took it away from me, it would be my identity. And I actually, over the years, was at odds or painstakingly at odds to tell people I'm not a basketball player. I'm just somebody who happens to be good at basketball. There's so much more to what I do. Not many people believed it because basketball was the thing I was most talented at. But my daughter's actually very similar to me in this manner, and she had a collegiate career. She's come home and she's gotten into real estate. But the longer I was in the game, the more I grew to love it, not because of the sport itself, but because of the people I was meeting and the people I was interacting with. I grew to love them, and as a result, grew to love the game because that's how I'd met these people and that's how it kept me connected to them.
Do you remember what age you were when you decided to actually have a crack? Like it was going to be something you were going to do?
Well, that first game I mentioned, I was 17 years old. I didn't play my second game for another 3 months. So it was well and truly after my 18th birthday where it was probably 6 months into my first junior season, and I used to watch some of my teammates and think, I think I can replicate some of the skill components of the game they're doing when there's not a defender involved and I don't have to deal with that. I think I can do it. But as soon as they put a defender in or put 4 other players on the court, I was all at sea. So it took me a long time to learn it, but it became a matter of actually investing time into it, A, but B was investing in my body a little bit. As a tennis player, I could be skinny and lanky and I moved okay, but in a more physical sport, I needed to be able to compete in that manner as well. So that was probably what took me the longest. And I think I believed early enough that I could be okay, but it took me a good 3.5 years before I understood I could be pretty good.
Those 3 years, you were still playing at a high level, or was it semi-pro, or because it was beyond high school at that point?
It was professional, but it was 2 minutes a game my first year, 4 minutes a game my second year, 10 minutes a game my third year, and it wasn't until my fourth year that I became a starter. And it's, so many kids today across all sports, I see parents all the time complaining about lack of opportunity, lack of game time. They'll change clubs, they'll change teams because they feel that the coach doesn't like their son or daughter, but it's such an instant gratification mindset and one that you feel something's owed to you, not the fact that you have to go out and get it. And the way it was explained to me was that I could have done that on any other team, but I was a part of a very good team. And that, again, I'll come back to habits. The habits I was developing, the investment I was making in my body when I came out of being sore and being tired and that education phase, I'd come out more quickly and I'd come out at a much higher level than those who were just muddling around, changing clubs, being the same player week in, week out as what they'd always been. And there could not have been better advice given to me because it was absolutely true.
Do you think that you have to be passionate about something to invest yourself in it wholeheartedly?
Yeah, I do. That doesn't necessarily have to be the thing. It can be the improvement in yourself. And for me, the thing I was actually passionate was I was fascinated as to what I was actually capable of. And I don't think enough people figure out what they're actually capable of for a number of reasons. Getting in their own way, being afraid of being uncomfortable, all these types. It's just easier not to. But I was fascinated as to what I was capable of. And when it was all said and done at the end of my career, I'm really, really proud that I think I figured that out. And I should say, and I hope it doesn't come across wrong, is the player I became was far better than anything I could have imagined those first 3 or 4 years. But I believe when my coach told me and I was invested into his vision, it took me a while to catch up, but he was right. It was incredible.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think that curiosity is a superpower, right? Like when, you know, I help people get sober from drugs and out that community. I tell people all the time, like at some point when it's hard, you know, if you clean for like a week or two, whatever, you got to start to become more interested and curious around who you could be versus your current situation, right? Like you kind of have to fall in love with this future vision of yourself and then apply some will and direction behind that. And that's fascinating that you developed that at such a young age. Like, what were your parents like? Did they have a hand to play in that?
They always supported me in what I did, and I think that was important. And probably dad, as a tennis player, was probably a little bit more, yeah, had a little bit more to say because he'd played the sport and shared opinions, rightly or wrongly, more often than what he did in basketball. At some level, playing a sport that he'd never seen probably allowed him to step away from that. Yeah, there's nothing worse than receiving advice from someone that you haven't particularly asked it from. Yet that's what we see with parents all the time. And my answer to that is probably the parent that I hope to become is one that, the line I always use with all of my kids is that I really enjoy turning up and watching them play. That's the favourite part of my week. It has nothing to do with their performance. They're not going to get an opinion from me unless they ask it of me. But it's true. I love watching my kids compete in sport or do something, that word you use, do something they're passionate about. I love sitting down and watching my son compete in a Dungeons and Dragons tournament, not because I've got any interest in the thing, but I've got the most interest in the world in him.
That's a wonderful conversation in itself, right? Like his parents, like I've got a son who's 7, who's very different to me. And if I'm not careful, I can overlay how I define what success in terms of his attributes should look like. Do you know what I mean? And that
I do.
And I tend to be biased towards competitiveness, action, and he tends to think about, well, if I win, someone loses, and and it's like how do I allow him to have his own journey without overlaying my shit? Because the last thing I want to be is that dude on the sideline that's screaming in a kid's game like an idiot, right? Like, I mean, that's the worst look.
Yeah, you know what? My daughter's habits and her personality reflected mine more closely than my 2 sons. I often ask people when I'm in a room, and maybe I did it on our afternoon, but if you to think of the best teammate, leader, mentor, whatever it might be that you've ever had, normally there's that one person that jumps to mind. And if I ask you to describe that person in one word, I've never had an answer that had anything to do with the skill of the person. It was always how they made you feel when you're how they made you feel. When they walk in the room just feels like it's a better place. It's something that I know in my most competitive days I wasn't. And so there's almost a yin and yang. That ultra competitive mindset is often perceived negatively from those around you, and oftentimes the personality that you describe, where if I win, somebody else is losing, there's that level of empathy that any time they're in a room, that there's a caring nature to it. People want to surround themselves with this type of person. And I don't think outside of sport, and we get brought up, only one person can win or only one team can win. In life, that's not the case. There are hundreds and thousands of people who can win at any given time in the same industry. There doesn't have to be a standalone. One thing I truly believe is that comparison is the thief of joy. And I say that if I'm comparing myself through my career, and it took me a while to figure it out, I'll always find someone better than me and I'll be miserable. If the only thing I always felt the need to do by the end of it was compare the version of me today to the version of me yesterday or last week or last month, and if that's improving, then I'm winning. I actually think that's how my sons see that thing, and they don't necessarily improve at the same rate, A, as each other, or B, as my daughter or myself, who's driven to compete. But, geez, when you see it, it's fascinating watching their journey, and I think they've matured a lot more quickly than what I did because they don't necessarily feel they need to win.
I think you're touching on the growth mindset, right? Like, I think the problem with, you know, that the zero sum game is that people that typically have that view may be perfectionists and inflexible, right? So, and I think that leads beautifully into your story. Like when you went to the US, you're now a smaller fish in a bigger pond. If you didn't have that ability to like not be the best in the room, or if you looked at like I either win or lose, that experience could have broke you. Correct, right? Like versus like the ability to be a bit more agile and competitive, but also what can I learn from the people around you? Maybe you can unpack how that unfolded for you.
It happened really quickly. For the first time in my life, I got on an aeroplane and turned left. That was the first thing. And that was surreal. I landed and it's the 5-star treatment before you end up at the practice facility. I sign a contract for $6 million. I was on $60,000 a year. And I just thought, geez, I'm stealing this. I would have done this for $100,000. But then the players test you out. You get all the equipment. You walk into a locker room that's worth more than my house. And first possession, they roll the ball into you. And I went to my best move and my shot got blocked into the sidewall. Now, the guy who blocked me was Sean Bradley, who's 7'6" tall, and I'm right on 7 foot. And quite literally, my mindset in that moment, it was incredible. In that moment, I thought, shit, if this is me, I'm done. You said you enjoyed the word curiosity. I love the fact that I feel like I've always been naive and allowed myself to be naive insofar as that I thought I'm going to have to teach myself to shoot the ball. Because if I'm battling against guys this size and I'm not the most physical guy out here, I'm dead. So if they're at an advantage here, I better make my advantage somewhere else. And so I really, really invested so many hours into shooting the ball. And back then, 7-footers weren't allowed to shoot the ball. Now, I was lucky to have a teammate, Dirk Nowitzki, at the same time, the following year, who took that to a whole nother level. He might be the best player in the world at his size to ever do it, but that was what I was surrounding myself with, the sort of people who were naive enough to think, well, just because everybody's done it a certain way doesn't mean we have to do it that way. We can explore alternative ways to do it. And I've always enjoyed that naivety and thinking, well, why not? Because I'm 7 foot tall, it doesn't have to be an excuse. It can be a point of difference.
I heard that was kind of the same with Rodman's journey, right? Like I think, I'm not a big basketball guy, but from what I understand, like I think he recognized that his claim to fame would be rebounding, right? Like he just doubled down on, I guess, just developing capability and finding his competitive advantage.
He did. And, the thing is, I think on any given team, there's a superstar, perhaps two. After that, there need to be specialists. And it's like the workforce. And I think so many players get caught up in being really, really good at everything. Not everybody's the type of athlete Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan was. Not everybody's 7'2" tall. So you have to specialise in something. And that's exactly what he may have been the best one to ever do it, Dennis Rodman. The coach would look down the bench and rain, hail or shine. If you need somebody to defend and rebound, you knew exactly and set screens. That's what you're getting from Rodman. And he allowed talented players to be talented around him without the need to worry about whether or not Dennis is getting his. So I have a lot of respect for what he was able to do as an athlete.
Yeah, it's interesting. I remember, and again, I'm not a big AFL guy, as you can tell. I'm, American. I met Sam Mitchell once. I think he played for Hawthorn or something. And I remember him telling us, we had him with a client, he said that the coach has to look at who to play. He's going to play me because I'm the best at, and I forgot what it was, but he was making a point that like he was specialized in something, right? Like the coach would not, think twice about not playing him because he knew that if he took that out, they lack that capability. And I think that's great insight. Like Chris, at that level of basketball, like is everyone training as hard, or still like some people still like just depending on their talent? Like, is everyone going hard? Because I'm thinking like everyone must just have great habits, working hard. Is that the case or not?
No, it's not. There's some of the best athletes in the world. Now, the great ones do, and the ones who don't get caught up quickly. But so much, even in the NBA, comes back to improvement in yourself in your own time, because there's 82 games in a regular season, then playoffs for over half of the league. There's just not that much time when you add travel to get your work in. So you've got to find your times. Most players over there have their own guy as well outside the coaching staff that can go and get that work when the team's not together. But you know what? It's the thing about the NBA, if you're a low-minute guy and you might have 3 games in a week or whatever it might be, the guys playing a lot of minutes are the ones who they'll continue their improvement. You'll fall further and further behind because not only aren't you playing, you're not training as well because there are no training sessions.
You said something at our event, and it was funny because everyone was looking at me because you had made a comment around the need to improve and work in your own personal time. In about a week and a half, I sent an email to the exec team telling them that, like, you all got a seat at the table. Some of you wanted a seat at the table, and I was pushing them to do some training out of work. And I was like, you guys have to start to invest in yourselves in your personal time. It's harder in exec though, right? Because I think people talk more about work-life balance. Like, I would imagine with a team full of NBA players that are getting paid millions of dollars, like they would understand that. But in terms of the executive community, I think some of that's lost. Like, you want a seat at the table. You want to be good. Business is a craft. Invest in yourself. You need to learn, and you can't do that on game day. You know, we're doing pitch presentation, right? Like in terms of pitching in front of clients. I'm like, we can't just wait till the day. And so they're like, why are you making us practice? This is weird. And mock pitches. And I'm like, because, you know, when we're in front of the client, that's like game day. You got to spend hours, right, preparing for that.
It's habit. Under pressure, you don't rise to the occasion, you revert to habit. I think it's with anything that we do. And yeah, the way that I've always liked to phrase it is investing in yourself in your own time. Steve Nash, one of my favourite teammates, ever taught me that. And he couldn't understand for the life of him how teams expected to get better when everyone wanted to improve themselves in team times. He thought if you invest in yourself in your own time and imagine if everyone brought a slightly better version of themselves back to the group, and then the time you're together, you improve the group as a whole. It sounds so simple, but it's amazing how few people are willing to do it. And, you know, as we record this, I know this will be weeks in by the time people listen, but I shake my head at the law that was just passed, the right to disconnect, which essentially allows us to not have to do that at all. We can be exactly what we are, and the only work we need to do is in work time. I just scratch my head. I don't understand that one at all.
Yeah, Chris, don't get me started on that, man. Like, I think that we're softening our culture. We're softening our children. You know, we're raising snowflakes, and the systems and society is making it okay to do that, right? Like, it's challenging, right? Because when you're trying to raise resilient kids, everyone wants kids to read about being resilient. But when the rubber meets the road, we're moving them away from actions and things that actually make them resilient. It's phenomenal.
And it will take something to figure out who is. And I haven't read a lot about it, but it will take a global look back over history. Some of the most poignant times are the tragedies, and it creates a resilience, and it creates an opportunity for people to come together to actually survive or to get through a thing. I hope it doesn't get to that, but you're right. I've got a few things where I employ people. It's really, really hard to find reliable, resilient people who want to do a job and want to get better at it. What they want are results now. They want to get a pay rise now. I mean, how many times in business do we hear, I've been here a year, I want a pay rise? Why? It doesn't make sense. So there's that sense of entitlement that I think one of the things I'm fortunate for, I'm grateful for, is that as a sports person, my contracts were year to year. I could be cut at any time and I didn't have fair work or I didn't have anything like that. My job was done. It was on me to perform to ensure that I was offered another contract for the right to play and the right to continue my career. I wasn't afforded anything just by turning up.
Do you struggle, and did you struggle with that transition into commerce and entrepreneurship, where you found that you held a standard from your basketball days? And again, you're dealing with the one percenters in the NBA. Like, how did you manage that when you step into the land of the mortals, right? Like, what happens?
I was very, very careful with the people I surrounded myself with. I'm a big fan of being the dumbest person in a room. And if I'm going into something, I want people who I trust who are experts in something that I'm not. And I want to pick their brain. I want to learn from them. If I'm the smartest guy in the commerce world, we're not going to be very successful. I do understand people a little bit. I do understand teams a little bit. I do understand a few things around the fringes. But when it comes to growing a company, to growing a brand, to growing or the back end of a whole, how the back end of a company works, I need help, and I need people that I trust who are experts in that I don't have to look over their shoulder, but it just gets done so I can go and do what I need to do. We come together and we plan. But the answer to that is the people. Every single, and I'm just thinking right now, but every single genuine opportunity I've either invested in or became a part of was to do with the people involved in it, and every single one of those people I met through my playing career.
And going back to your playing career, so when you decided that you were going to double down on your desire to become a shooter, which was obviously uncommon for someone your height, did that just come off well? Like, what did that look like?
It wasn't the easiest thing, but the term that I've come across in the last 3, 4, 5 years is gamification. And when that was explained to me, it was like a penny dropping, where it was how I used to play tennis actually in the carport. I'd have full US Open, Grand Slam, Wimbledon tournaments hitting over a net in the carport in those 4 little concrete squares. And I'd 15 love, 15 or point to point, Agassi, Lendl, Agassi, and then I'd do the whole draw. And it was gamified. And it was a little bit the same when I taught myself to shoot. It was that, I couldn't go to the next level until I'd made 8 out of 10, and then 9 out of 10, and then 10 out of 10. And then I'd have to make them from deep, or I'd had to make 2 spots in a row. So all of these games I just made up in my head that I couldn't progress until I'd passed. My very first basketball coach gave me an offhanded rule one of my early days, Al Westover, and I took it and I almost poured kerosene on it. And he said, "You're not allowed to shoot a shot in a game until you can make 10 in a row, until you can make 10 in a row of that shot at practice." I wanted to make 25. I'm like, I'll go more. So no, it wasn't easy, but again, the naivety for me was big guys are generally slower and they'll stand off you and stand in the middle of the paint back then. And I used to catch the ball at the 3-point line. And it was actually Mark Bradkey, who used to be one of the greatest centers of all time, but because bigs weren't allowed to shoot, he'd be hitting Andrew Gaze or Leonard Copeland and just standing in the middle, blocking everything up. And I'd have the ball outside the 3-point line thinking, if I was Andrew Gaze, no, there's not a chance in the world I'd ever be this open, because everybody knows how well he can shoot it. What if? What if I could shoot this shot? Surely it's a good shot because it's uncontested. And that was the one I started with, that 3-point shot from the top of the key. And I wanted to master that one, and then I went to another spot. And then I tried to master in my mind each of those positions. And again, you go back to habit. It's by the time I shot a shot in a game. Somebody asked me one time, they were talking about confidence. And for me, confidence is exactly habit. They said, what do you feel when you miss a shot in a game? And I'd never thought about it. And it probably took me a minute, and I said, surprise. Because I'm only shooting a shot I've drilled thousands and thousands and thousands of times. So when I miss, I'm surprised. That certainly doesn't mean I'm not going to shoot the next one. And it certainly doesn't mean if I miss 2 or 3 or 4 in a row, I'm going to stop, because I've invested too many weeks, months and years into this to think just because I've missed 6 in a row, it's not going to click in, because my habit is that it's going to get there.
Why were like big guys not really allowed to shoot? And the second question is, when you started to do this in practice, like did your coach and teammates understand your strategy, and were they supportive?
No. They thought I was soft. They thought I was avoiding contact. Why couldn't big guys do it? A, because they weren't allowed to. Clearly there are a lot of slower, lumbering, bigger guys who aren't extraordinarily coordinated. But at the same time, if I was to give you a reason for that in my mind, it's because from the minute they're 8 years old and the biggest kid, they're taught a particular skill set because they're the biggest kid on the court. Then they don't learn to dribble. They don't learn to shoot. They learn to run to where the ring is, and they learn to rebound, and they learn to run to the other end and run to the... That's what they know. They're almost institutionalized to a skill set. Because I didn't grow up playing the game, I certainly wasn't that. And I'm grateful for the fact that every time I did something at 18 years old, I was doing it for the first time. So my technique with most things hadn't been being done incorrectly for years. My habits right from the start were good. But no, so even when I did start making shots, and even at a high level and even as a professional at the end of my career, I was soft because I was shooting the three. I used to chuckle. I thought if only they knew how many thousand hours I've put into trying to make this a strength, because my mindset always was, if you're big and slow and your advantage is inside, I'm going to take you outside. Then the second they put a smaller guy on me who was a bit faster, straight back inside, because I had that. I had my NBA coach, Don Nelson, my second NBA coach, I had another one for a month. He was always a little bit different. I credit him a lot with me thinking a little bit different. He says, everybody says play to your strengths. I'll always advocate playing to your opposition's weaknesses. And the more I thought about that, I thought that's actually brilliant, because point guards don't practice guarding the post. Bigs don't practice guarding the three-point line. So putting opposition in unfamiliar territory can create almost as much success as simply going to your strengths, because you'll be going against someone else whose strength is defending what your strength is. So there was a little bit in that as well as I got further and further through my career.
Bit of art or war in there. Did your position change as you started to be able to shoot, or did they keep you on the same position?
I was naive enough to think that wherever I was the minute I moved, I'm not in a position. I truly believed before it was trendy to think so that basketball was non-positional. Now that doesn't mean that certainly doesn't mean you don't need experts in certain skills. But I don't care if you're Luka Doncic and you're 6'8", bringing the ball down the floor because you're an expert, or you're Muggsy Bogues and you're 5'6". Whoever's the safest guy to bring the ball down the floor, does that make you a point guard? Does it make you a guard? If you're Nikola Jokic, are you a center, or when you bring the ball down the floor, are you a guard? I don't know anymore. So for me, again, sometimes the easiest thing in the world for our team was for me to bring the ball down the floor, because my guy couldn't come up and put any sort of pressure on me. Then the minute a little guy did, I'd flick it to our guard and the big was done. So again, it was... No, I never thought my position changed, because the minute I crossed half court, as far as I was concerned, we're interchangeable. Right.
And so we're going to move on to when you start to look to retire. Like, and you talked about this concept of identity at the beginning. I've had lots of conversations. It's like, is being consumed with your craft as your identity, is that a superpower, or is it, does it make you less flexible? And there's been opinions that have been varied on this topic, which is, it's a huge topic. But we also know in terms of athletes transitioning, a lot of the ones that struggle are the ones that maybe feel like they had unfinished business or are not at peace with that transition or have anchored their identity. How did you transition, and was it simple and easy? And why do you think some people struggle and some people don't?
For the exact reason that you say, and I can absolutely see both sides. And I've seen incredibly successful athletes be so single-minded that their parents have driven them from when they're 5 years old, that all they do, maybe you look at the Williams sisters in tennis, that may be an example. And then you look at others who have played soccer, they've gotten into Hakeem Olajuwon, even Roger Federer, there's even in using that same sport, I don't think there's one pathway to success. I think it's based on your personality more so than a rule. How did I cope with the transition? I probably need to go back a step further. I never had any intention of leading, of being a captain. I didn't think it was me. But a couple of things happened that allowed me to feel that I wanted to accept the position of captain that was offered to me at the Melbourne Tigers. The first one was that when I'd tell stories from being in the NBA and being in Russia and being in Spain, my teammates actually seemed interested. They seemed to listen because I'd had these experiences that they didn't have. And I wasn't necessarily telling stories only. I was sharing experience, and they, in some way, shape or form, may have been benefiting from them. But probably the more important part was towards the end of my career, I got so much enjoyment when our rookies succeeded or when our low-minute guys succeeded, because I could relate to that. And I knew how important that was. I didn't necessarily get all the support in the world in those first couple of years from everyone, but I really appreciated those who did. And I was probably even more emotionally invested in them being successful than me. I didn't know that's what leadership was, but I think that's it, is investing yourself in the success of people around you and by default becoming even more successful yourself because you're part of something really special. That was what got me into coaching. I walked into my first interview and I said, I actually don't think I can coach, and I've got no interest in winning championships. And this is at Caulfield Grammar, which is a high school here in Melbourne. I said, but what I'm interested in is and I looked at Chris Judd, went to Caulfield Grammar and was sitting with his Caulfield Grammar football Guernsey in a frame behind me, or behind the person I was speaking to who was interviewing me. I said, I'm really, really interested to see if we can get a couple of basketball singlets in there with players who go on to be successful in basketball, to become professionals. If we get, I'm going to invest in training people like that to achieve. If that means we win, that means we win. That may take care of itself. If it means we lose for long-term gain, I just think so many coaches of young athletes all the way up to teenagers get so caught up in winning junior championships, they forget to continually develop the players themselves and allow them to retain bad habits because they're successful now. But I know I've seen so many things that you're good now, but if you're doing that in 3 years' time, that's not going to hold up. So it's my responsibility to try to change that now. Some listen, some don't, but I was more interested in the individual development there. And as a result, we won state titles, we won national titles, but that was never the goal. It was the investment in the people within the group.
And I think also what I'm hearing is that you still were around the game, and that transition was from player to captain to teacher. And so it was still the craft that you loved, right? Like, and you just found a way to show your passion in another way, but with your sport.
That wasn't a full-time job. And at the same time, I haven't told you this story, but I used to be one of those players that didn't mind doing the corporate, going and mingling in a room and not gathering as a playing group. I didn't mind meeting people. And I said yes to a basketball clinic when I was in the NBA for my uncle, who had a client, and that's all I knew. And it was for an under-9 boys team. And a little bit like my first game, I felt good saying yes. The day came and I had a bunch of things on. I'm like, what have I done? I can't really afford the time to do this. But by now, the second I walked in the room, they would never have known that, and I was the absolute best version of me. One of the things I always do at a basketball clinic is I'll get every single person within reason an individual piece of advice for a couple of reasons. It allows them to feel special, but also gives them one individual takeaway that they'll go and work on, and they can hold on to that, not just something I've said to the entire group. Now, for me, being 7 foot tall, speaking to a group of under nines, that can be daunting. So I'm down on one knee, sort of straddled as I'm talking to these kids, and I do it for each kid. I always say you never know where your next opportunity will come from. The dad of one of the kids on that team owned a company called Latrobe Financial, which he's recently sold to it. He's very successful out of it. Greg O'Neill, he's become a very close friend, but he offhandedly said months after that, he said, the day you retire, I'm employing you because you can speak at other people's level. And I just threw it away as, sure, mate, thanks very much. Sure enough, I was hungover the day after I retired. My phone rang. He says, when do you want to start and what do you want to do? Oh, so I don't really want to get into the finance sector. He says, I don't care. What do you want to do? And he employed me the day after I retired, and I was an ambassador for Latrobe Financial for over 10 years. I worked with Jackie Cooper. I worked with Darcy Moore. I worked with their leadership groups. I worked with their clients. Again, you could ask me any question today, I'll tell you the answers, people. He provided an opportunity that also allowed me to transition into the corporate world, into the finance sector, while at the same time retaining the sporting part, not because it was my identity, but because I was so familiar, because so many people love connections to sport, whether they play it, watch it, absorb it, bet on it, whatever it is. There's an interest, and the interest in the parallels between sport and business is in some way, shape or form why we're chatting now, but it allowed me to grow in the business world while having that safety net underneath me.
One of the things that I think you're really good at is connecting the dots. Like you'll tend to find, the couple times I've spoke to you this time on the show, but, listening to you before at the event was you kind of know that opportunities are everywhere and it's about exposure and then connecting the dots. And I think that you're really good at that. Like you seem to be quite intuitive in understanding that opportunities are everywhere. It's about exposing yourself to as many opportunities as possible and then connecting those dots and see where they go. So where are those dots leading to you to these days, Chris? Like, what are you up to now?
I've got a pub, I've got a bar in Melbourne, both of whom allow me to employ, and I say this inverted commas, unskilled labour as well as skilled labour, which I love because I've always been a massive advocate of give me the right person, I'll teach them a job. And it's an industry I can absolutely do that. I can teach them hospitality. And I don't expect them to stay forever, but I want to help them on their journey. The kitchen's a little bit different. They need to be skilled. No, look, I run sporting tours to the United States where the way I sell, I pull back the curtain and let people into my NBA life. And they've been fantastic. I bring speakers to Australia. I've had Dirk Nowitzki. Luke Longley and Josh Giddey are clearly Australian, but we got them touring around Australia. It occurred to me through COVID that leading up to COVID, I could walk into so many bars, pubs on any weekend and hear an AFL player tell a story about the 1993 grand final or playing on Gary Ablett or whatever it might be. I thought we're not hearing basketball stories. I think there are some incredible basketball stories that deserve to be heard because it's a global sport. And I know within the network of basketball people there's an interest. So I started doing that, and I wanted to share other people's stories for the same reason I love listening to them, is that I learn so many things listening to them. Plus, again, it's a familiar environment for me, but I'm very project-based. I do some of this corporate work. You probably wouldn't know. Well, you would because you're in a room, but I don't promote that. Do a little bit of the mentoring thing, but I'll always say, you'll never read about it on social. I just think that's counterproductive to the minute you're telling people how good you are and what you do, you're probably not doing it for the right reason. So it's really nice when somebody picks up a phone and says, I heard from so-and-so, they said give you a call, and you go down a path and you see where it leads, but certainly not textbook, certainly not cookie cutter. It takes investment into that person to understand how you can help before you actually can. But I'm very clear to tell them I don't have a qualification. I don't necessarily have an answer for you, but I've got a series of ideas, observations, learned experiences that I'm very, very happy to share, and it's up to you what you take from them. So what am I up to? A whole bunch of different projects all at the one time. And but you know what, as much as anything, mate, and I know this will sound cliche, my daughter's just gotten back from the United States after 3.5 years. My son's studying. We've got the family in the same place at the same time for the first time in 5 years, and without having COVID around. So I'm actually really just enjoying spending as many minutes or as many days as I can with them all in the same room. And it's funny, I've enjoyed treating my kids like adults. I know that sounds like a simple thing, but I think we always treat our kids like kids. It's been fun treating them like adults. The conversation has changed. It's been really nice.
It's lovely. And Chris, before we land land the plane, as I like to say, we always ask our guests about habits. And like if you were to leave our audience with some habits that you feel really work well for you or that you like to impart, what would that be?
The first one is not a habit, but it was a mindset I had my eyes open to, and it's my favourite saying in the world. And I always say it excites the hell out of people who work hard, and it scares the shit out of people who are lazy. You never know who's watching. It's as simple as that. You never know who's watching. But look, the habit I would say is do it, share it, do it again, share it, do it again. That's what sport gives us. I wrote a book through COVID. I self-congratulated a little bit because I was just a chapter was about Dustin Fletcher, ex-AFL player, who's my old doubles partner. And I sent it to probably a handful of friends. In the old term, I know it was on computer, but you imagine red line after cross after comment. It was shit. So I did it again. Sent it back. I did it again. Sent it back. 5 edits I went through just for a 1,000-word short story. And I couldn't help but reflect, what if I had have published the first one? But think about that with students at school. We do a project or an assessment, we hand it in, and we say the first attempt is what I'm happy to stand by as being the best version of me. What if we shared it with a mate and then did it again? What if, as a sports person, we practiced a time or two, then played a grand final? But we turn up, we do it better, we share it, we ask for improvement, we do it again. By the time we submit something, it's a better version of what we'd previously anticipated sharing, or what most people's habit is to do it once and say, I'm done, here it is. So that would probably be the one that I find myself doing more and more often.
Yeah, it's excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time, Chris. Really enjoyed having you on the show. Really appreciate you. Where can the audience learn more about you and what you're doing? Like, where do you hang out? Do you hang out on social media?
I do. I do. Chris Anstey 13 on socials. HotelTrentham.com. Yeah, well, Chris Anstey, what am I? ChrisAnstey.com.au. But you'll find all the places. If you follow me on social, you'll find what I'm doing. And I share it there. I try to use social media for good, not evil. And it's a really nice way to stay connected with people all around the world, and to keep them in the loop when you don't talk to them every month. But I'll go the other way, mate. Thanks for having me on. It's really enjoyable chatting about this element of what we do, and I think it's probably in under-resourced areas, something I'm really passionate about, as you've clearly connected on, and really nice to share an episode with you. I appreciate your interest.
No problem, Chris. Thank you so much for your time, man.